What we're going to do in this exercise is take a look at prepping this scene for Nowhere Metaverse. So we'll take a look at the basic construction, how we can optimize the mesh, and then we'll add some entities before exporting it and taking a look at the scene in the previewer. So what we've got is a world, a Minecraft style world that's made from individual blocks. Let's just disable snap. So made from individual blocks, and they are butted together. So this creates an unoptimized mesh in the sense that we have a lot of surfaces that are present in the mesh but aren't visible in Nowhere. So we have to get rid of them. We need to remove them so that we are optimizing how much structure Nowhere is essentially rendering. So we get rid of everything that's not visible so that all we have left are the visible components. But whilst that's relatively straightforward to do for our ground or soil grass blocks, because they are single-sided, so if we go into the material, we can enable backface culling so we don't see the inside of the mesh. But for our transparent objects, our objects that have transparency, the way that these are set up, the objects have two faces. So they have an inside face and an outside face. And this is because Nowhere doesn't support two-sided materials in the way that we would want them to be, because Blender is clever enough to know which side of the material is facing the light and which side should be in shadow. So it can render a lighter face on one side, a darker face on the other. For Nowhere, it can't do that. So what can happen is that, so we've got our light source, so this side is lit, this side is in shade or shadowed, and in Nowhere what will happen is the mesh will be duplicated and flipped so that this side becomes this side, but that also includes the lighting. So the lighting will be flipped, which in turn means that the shaded side will carry the illuminated side's lighting. So to avoid that, what we have to do with these types of objects is create a duplicate and flip the mesh. That will give us a front and back side to the mesh, separate surfaces. But for optimizing, we can't optimize these in the same way that we might do with our cubes. So we can't get rid of the inside facing surfaces because for transparency, those are actually visible. So we need to keep those so that we can see the effect of lighting on the inside of our mesh. So those are just the two main points to be aware of when we are dealing with materials that are just solid, they're opaque, they have no transparency, versus materials that do have transparency with backface culling. They're set up slightly differently to accommodate proper or more correct shading and shadows and illumination than the other types of materials. So it's a little bit of the background that's important to know when we are optimizing, because if we use the same technique to everything, we'll destroy some of the effect that we have associated with our transparent meshes. So we've got this all organized: blocks, bushes, grass, and obviously the trees. So we'll just go through this one group or type at a time. So let's hide everything. Use the outliner. Hide the lights. We'll switch to material preview. Hide the leaves, bushes, grass, fence, tree trunk, portal, signs. So all we have left are the blocks. and the entities. We need to get rid of that as well, hide that. So that's what we've got. So we're going to select all of these, select all. We want to shift click the section that's rooted at grid 0, because Nowhere will reset that, and join everything together. So object join. This will join all the separate objects into a single object, like so. So it's all now one object. And for our optimization, we first need to check. So I'm going to go into solid mode. Object, shade, smooth. We need to check smoothing. So part of the mesh was built previously and has sharp edges assigned, so we can get rid of those because we can use the modifier, the edge split modifier for this, because we are dealing with blocks, straight right angles and very formal shapes. So first thing, edit mode, select all, then edge, clear sharp. We just want to get rid of them. So edge, clear sharp. So that's the blue highlights. Edge, clear sharp. So of course the objects all look a little mushy. Marshmallows. Object mode. We can do this in edit mode, but it's easier to understand in object mode. So modifiers. It's already got a split modifier, but if one was not assigned, add modifier, edge split. So select and assign, and it will automatically, by default, assign the edge angle. We can disable sharp edges because we have nothing marked as sharp. So the threshold at the moment is 30 degrees. For this kind of object, these very square blocky shapes, the threshold is 90. So if the angle doesn't break 90 degrees, the surface won't be rendered as sharp. So go one down, 89, and that breaks the angle. So now every block is sharp as it should be, but we need to just double check just to make sure, and that's okay. So that's step one. So that was smoothing, shade smooth, and then assigning the modifier using edge angle. So step two, edit mode, we need to remove. So we're in face select, we need to remove, let's just select just hide those for the moment. Show hide, hide selected. We need to remove all of these internal surfaces. To do that, we need to do two things. So let's unhide. First, select all. We need to, because these are still separate objects, all of them. So we need to select all and remove doubles, or as it's now called, mesh, cleanup, merge by distance. Clean up, merge by distance. And what that does is it'll remove coincidental vertices. So that's vertices that occupy the same coordinates as one another. So even though these are separate objects, well, as they are separate objects, when they are butted up to each other, in order to describe the shape, this box has its own vertices, and this box has its own vertices. But to describe this corner, it also has a vertex in these corners that are coincidental with its neighbour. And we need to collapse all of those so that we just have one vertex in each corner where these edges butt up to each other, so that we can then remove the internal surfaces that are wasteful because they're not visible. So select all, mesh, clean up, merge by distance. We'll get confirmation and a little pop-up where we can adjust the value, and it shouldn't remove any more vertices than we need. So that's okay. That's removed all the vertices. So now all these faces are joined together. So this should mean that we can then make sure that nothing is selected. So select none. And then we want to use select all by trait, and then interior faces. So those are the ones that we need to get rid of. So that's select all by trait, interior faces. So it'll select all the interior faces, but in doing so it'll obviously select some of the exterior faces that we now need to just shift click and deselect so that they are not removed. And it's best to do this in solid mode to make it easier to see the selections. So we just have to go through this, and there isn't an easy way of doing this. We just have to manually select. So this is shift clicking each of these faces to remove them from the selection. Make sure none of the external faces are selected. Let's double check. And then we can just delete. So mesh, delete, faces. And that's removed. Let's just undo that. So we start out with 2764. Mesh, delete, faces, and that's removed almost 1,000 faces. So even though we've done that, we just need to double check. So we'll use a selection, circle select, just select the top surface, shift, shift. That allows us to extend the selection. And just hide. So we can see there's still a little, hasn't removed all of them, so we have to do some manual selection and removal. So we'll just do a quick time lapse on this because it'll take a while, then continue after we've selected and removed everything. Dropping out of time lapse for a second. What we can do is, now that we have this modifier assigned, we can disable edge angle. That'll make the mesh go a little bit mushy, but in doing so, it'll help us track down some of the errant areas of the mesh where we have internal faces that need to be removed, because it tends to affect the way shading works on the mesh, because the internal surfaces interfere with visible surfaces that we can see. So back to time lapse, we'll continue. Right, so that looks about done. Just re-enable edge angle again. So that's the platform cubes. So we've lost about 50%, maybe 50% of the waste. We've removed that. So that's the blocks. Signs we don't need to do anything with. Portal, we need to do the same sort of thing. So select all the blocks. This will be easier to prep. Join them. Join. Edit mode. Select all. Mesh. Clean up. Merge by distance. So we're just basically repeating the same steps. Just remove any excess. Then select none, and select by trait, interior faces, and we can see that this is much easier to delete the unseen, so mesh, unseen faces. So we've gone from 140 to 112. So that's the portal. Tree trunks, same again. So select. Join. So select our base object. Join. Edit mode. Select all. Mesh. Clean up, merge by distance, select none, and select by trait, interior faces, mesh, delete. Just double check. So that's the tree trunks. The fence is the same. So select the bottom one, object, join, edit mode. So this has edges marked sharp. We want to keep these because we need the posts to be smooth to give that effect of roundness, but we want the ends to be sharp to simulate a cut log. So select all, mesh, clean up, merge by distance. That's removed 112. Select none, select by trait, interior faces, and again this will be easier because of what our object is. Mesh, delete faces. Just double check. Yeah, that's okay. So again, we want this to be edge smoothed. So even though this has the modifier assigned to it, the smooth modifier, this time we're using sharp edges to define the sharpness or the smoothing instead of edge angle. So we're not using that, but we are using that. So that's the fence. So the grass we don't touch because, as we mentioned in the overview, we want these to remain separate because, let's just focus in on this one. So it's double-sided. So if we were to select all for this, make sure we haven't got anything else selected. So if we select all for that, right now it's two-sided, and then we collapse it, so we clean it up by merging the vertices. It'll collapse the meshes together and remove the flip side or the back side of the mesh, so it now makes it just a single plane. And so this is what we were talking about at the beginning in the overview, is that if we leave this as is with a two-sided material in Nowhere, it'll do what it normally does, which is duplicate the material that's assigned to the object, flip it, and it'll carry over not just the material, but the way that this side, this is the live side if you like, the active side, it'll carry over the active lighting onto the reverse, which is why grass often looks odd in game, because the back is being lit, duplicating the front face that is being lit when it should be shaded. This should be shaded. So we want to avoid doing that. So we won't undo. We won't collapse the grass together. We'll leave them as is. But what we will do is select them all, zoom out, select all the grass, select one as the active object, just join them. So we've got one object, so that's the grass. It'll be the same thing with the bushes. We'll leave these as is, and we'll leave them in their cubic form as well, because we want to be able to see the inside of the mesh, and we want to see that being lit appropriately relative to the outside of the mesh. So all we need to do with this, so just double check, so select one of them as the active object and just join these as well. So we'll leave these as separate blocks. The leaves will do the same thing, so select all, make one active, so shift click and then join these as well. So because we don't optimize these, because we do want the insides to be visible, leaves or transparent objects, they're going to be the most expensive component of a scene, especially when doing something like this. So that's everything. So grass, bushes, fence, tree trunk, portal, signs and blocks. So that is our scene. That's our scene fully optimized. So we started out with about 7,500, so we've lost about 2,000 plus. So let's save this file, save as, optimized, and then we can plant some entities. The first game-specific entity or property that we want to add is collision. So right now, if we go into scene properties where the Nowhere entity settings are, all the objects that we can see, so if the player interacts with these surfaces, they will basically fall through or pass through our objects. So we want to avoid that. So the quickest way to create our collision, because we've got such a varying structure, what we can do is simply object, duplicate objects. So object, duplicate objects. That'll create a duplicate. Press escape to reset. Now collisions don't need any materials, so whilst we are in the Nowhere Entities dialog, activate collision. So click collision. That will convert that object into a collision object. And then what we can do in material properties is delete the materials that are associated with that object. So all the materials that are currently listed. Click the minus button, delete the materials, and then for the sake of visibility, object properties, and we'll display this object as, right now it's textured as just a wire, so it doesn't interfere with what we're doing. So if we hide the blocks, there's the collision. So let's just rename this. Collision platform. Let's rename this whilst we're here, just platform, because there is only one. We want to do the same thing for everything apart from the grass and the signposts. We can pass right through those. So let's hide the blocks. Don't need the signs. The portal, we do need a collision for that, so same thing for that. Objects, duplicate objects, escape, remove the material. Let's turn this into a wireframe whilst we're here. So wire, delete the material, and then in world properties or scene properties, convert this to collision. So we'll just call this portal. That's the object. And then we'll call this collision underscore portal. So that's the portal, so we can hide that. Tree trunk. And just double click, call that trunks. Duplicate. Escape. Flag this as collision. Object properties, wire, and material properties. Delete the materials. Let's rename underscore trunks. So that's that done. Fence, we'll come back to that. Grass, we don't need to collide with those. Bushes, we do need to collide with those. So let's just call these bushes. Duplicate. Escape. Remove the material. Wire. And collision. But what we do want to do with these, where we left the leaves themselves, let's just rename this, where we left the leaves themselves intact. So we've got our separate cubic objects, front and back, or inside and outside. We want to collapse the collision so that we don't have inside and outside faces. So we need to do to these collision objects, what was done to the platforms. So, edit mode, select all, mesh, clean up, merge by distance, select none, then select by trait, interior faces, and we can see that's selected the faces that we don't need. Then we can just delete those. Mesh, delete faces. So now there's just a simple object that's shaped like our world objects, the objects that we see, but it uses less polygons, or less triangles, less faces. So that's the bushes done. We need to do the same thing to the trees, or the leaves. So let's just call this leaves. So select, duplicate objects, escape, collision, wire, and then delete the material. So again, repeat the process. So edit mode. Let's just hide the leaves for the moment so we can see what we're doing. So select all, mesh, clean up, merge by distance. That's removed 1,000 vertices. Select none, select by trait, interior faces, and again we have to be careful with this, so we need to switch back to solid mode just to double check what's been selected. Same for the upper tree. And then inside, and as before, just delete. So mesh, delete faces. So what we've now got is a mesh that covers our tree without a lot of internal collision surfaces. Let's just rename this. And then switch it back to wire. So there is our leaves collision. And that's it for that. So for the fence, what we can do, unhide the blocks. What we can do here is use the platforms, edit mode, make a selection, because the collision for these is essentially a box, just an extruded box. So we can make our selection, mesh, duplicate, so we're duplicating the individual faces that we have selected, escape to reset, and then what we want is mesh, separate, selection. So we want to create an independent object from this selection. Edit mode, object mode, select our new selection, edit mode, select all, and then we can use the extrude tool to extrude a box. So we'll make sure that snap's enabled, so we are snapping to the grid. And there's our collision, and again, collision doesn't need to be UV unwrapped, so we don't need to worry about UV mapping for these. All we want is for that to be wire, no material, and then set as collision. Just repeat that for the other sections. So because we extruded this from our platform, it's in the wrong group as well, just for organizational sake at least. So make sure we have that selected, then object, collection, move to collection, get this pop up, and we want the fence. So we'll drop those in fence. Do the same for the others. Select our blocks, and we've got some material assignment issues there that we need to take care of. So select our surfaces. And the back there, and the back there. Duplicate. Escape to reset. Mesh, separate, selection, object mode, select our new object, edit mode, select all. The extrude tool is still active, so we can just extrude upwards. There is our collision, object mode, set that as collision, remove the materials, and then set it as a wireframe. And then move that, so object, collection, move to collection, fence, and we've got this bit at the top here. So select the platform, select the surfaces that we want, mesh, duplicate, escape, mesh, separate, selection, object mode, select the new object, edit mode, select all, and then extrude. So that's just a simple way of creating our collision from existing meshes. So we don't have to keep remodeling things. We can just do a quick selection, duplicate, and extrude to get our collision, because again, collision is very simple, doesn't need to be complicated. So remove our materials, set as collision, and then wire. Finally move, fence. So also, because we've extruded from an existing optimized mesh, we won't necessarily need to do any significant tidying up. So there's no internal faces to remove, because we've already done that, and it's essentially just extruded from these individual faces. So it'll extrude as a group, which will create a block absent the internal faces between each face or segment. So again, let's move that to the collection. Did we do that? Collection, move to collection, fence. Yes, we did. So fence. Let's join these sections together. They are. Let's join the collision sections together. Join. We'll call this collision underscore fence. And fence. So that's the collision done for all our objects. Again, we don't need collision for the grass because we can walk through that, or signs, we can walk through those as well. So this is what we've got so far. Let's enable the lights and the entities. So the next entity to add are the interactive elements. Oh, before we do that, actually, let's go back down here and sort this material assignment out. So select our platform, edit mode, select those two faces, material properties, select the appropriate material that should be assigned to those, and then just click the assign button. And they are instantly sorted out. So let's save this before we go any further. File, save as, just call this number 2. So for our entities, we want to be in scene properties, and we can start adding our scene elements. So as we've got a portal up here, let's just drop the portal in first. So make sure the entities collection is selected. This will mean that any entity that we add to the scene should be dropped into this collection. So make sure that's selected in the outliner, and then we want to add a portal. So click the button. It'll drop in a portal at the 3D cursor. And all we need to do is just move that into place at our portal. Use our widgets. Control to snap to the degree increment. That's a little off, so 26. I'm going to use the location -8, 15. So that needs to be a little higher. Let's try 26.5. So that's the portal. These are all configurable. Once the room is published, the user the admin of the room that's using this can configure these to different destinations, so a different room. So although we drop them in, the destination for the portal is set once the room is live. So that's a portal. We've got our player start. Maybe we could add just a couple of more blocks at the start here, just to give this a bit more room. So this is always the way. Some modifications after the fact. So what we're going to do here is just separate these. We're going to use these instead of duplicating these. What we can do is mesh, split, selection. So this will split these surfaces away from the parent mesh and allow us to move it, because what we can then do is select these, duplicate those, press escape to reset, move those into place, duplicate that surface, duplicate, escape. Because we're just snapping to the grid, everything just snaps into place. So we're not having to remodel and then re-UV map sections. We are using existing meshes, escape, using existing meshes to make any changes or alterations just to save time. Duplicate, escape. So now that we've done that, select all, mesh, clean up just to remove the duplicate vertices. And then of course we have to update the collision. So select the collision, edit mode, and for this we can extrude. So that's the platform and that's the collision. That just gives the player a bit more room when they load in. So we've got the portal. Let's add some content screens. So again, make sure the entities group is selected, and then we'll add in content screen. Let's see where that's headed. Up here, let's move that down. Its orientation is determined by the text. And we can scale these. Let's put this under the tree. Again, this is another configurable entity once it's gone live. So let's just save this whilst we're here. Save as number 3. So what this can be configured for is an image or a video or something else. So that's 1. let's add a screen up here. So screen entity. Again, make sure the entities group is selected. Screen. It's going to drop it at the 3D cursor. So again, we just move this into place. And yet again, orientation is determined by the text. And these also can be scaled. Let's be a bit more precise. Type in values. So that's the screen. And let's add something else up here, another content screen. So again, make sure entity is selected, content screen, that's added at the cursor. $180. Shrink that down. And then maybe one on the other side as well. So what we can do here, rather than fishing around for our object, what we can do is just use the object, snap cursor to selection. So object, snap cursor to selection. That's snap the cursor to that point. So when we add another content screen, it'll appear at the cursor. So how big is that one? Let's make it 0.7 all the way. Make that 1.7. So these could be YouTube videos or movies that can be watched by the user. And then a final one that we can drop in is a link block. Click on that, it'll drop in this big box. Move that over the sign. Let's disable snap so that that can be clicked and send the user to whatever is signified on the signpost or the notice. And again, that's configurable once the room is published live. So let's just tidy the names up. So we've got content screen. We'll do _1 because it doesn't like the 0.00 that Blender does. That's nowhere _2 _3 screen. Let's just call that _1 portal. That's okay. Link block. So we could put another link block here. So we want the link block to appear here. So again, we'll do object, snap, cursor to selected, and then we can drop in our link block and it'll appear at our object. So we didn't have to do too much backing about. There is our link block. So rename this link block _2 link block _1. So those are our entities. So we've got a player, a couple of content holders, a screen, and then these link blocks. If we wanted to, we could also add, let's add a teleporter. So we're going to make some adjustments to our mesh again. So mesh, split, selection. We need to make sure that we've got snap enabled, so undo that. Select, duplicate, escape, move, select, duplicate, escape, move, select, duplicate, let's make that a little bit bigger. Select all, mesh, clean up, merge by distance. And then what we can do is place a portal here. So again, we can shift the cursor to our selection. So mesh, snap, cursor to selection. So this is different because we're in mesh editing mode. So it's in the mesh menu versus the object menu when we're in object mode. And then we can exit into object mode and drop in a teleporter. So that'll drop in a trigger and a destination. Move that. And let's put this back down at the start. Rotate. So what will happen is we'll add a sign. Let's just hide that for the moment. We'll add a sign here, which is a prompt. That will allow the user to teleport down to the ground, triggering this entity. Just scale it up. Two times. Fit it on the platform. That will be our trigger block. So once that's activated, the user is teleported down to the yellow target. So those are our entities, and that's our scene prepped for export. So let's save this. So before we export, we have to organize the scene a little bit. So all of the objects that are going to be included have to be in the same collection or in the same root collection. So anything that's not being used has to be deleted from the scene completely. So any previously used objects, they all have to be removed. So shift click, delete. So remove the collection, delete the base blocks. So these are the blocks that the world was made from. So we have leaves, wood or trunk, obsidian or the portal, ground with grass, trim, ground or dirt with grass on the top, just dirt, a fence, a signpost, some text, and then grass. And we've just duplicated those to make the platforms, the trees, everything else. So these are no longer useful, so we have to get rid of them. Select, delete. We have to get rid of the group, right click, delete. Portal, rename. That should just be the only. We want to make sure that where we've used multiples, we need to use an underscore instead of a period. Oh, that's my portal. So that's the actual portal. Let's call it _1. Portal. So everything now, so we've got the skybox, we've had that hidden the entire time just to make it easier to select things inside. Otherwise we're just selecting the skybox all the time. So that's the full scene. Let's just save this before we do anything else. Save another version. Save as 5. Save as. And then we want to select everything. An object, collection, move to collection. And we want to move this into scene collection. So that's the root collection. Then we need to get rid of all the empty collections so that all we have are all the objects we've got some letters. Forgot to mention those. We've got some transfers essentially, or decals. So that's sign 2. Sign underscore text underscore 1. Grass underscore 1. Leaves. Light. Light. There's our link block. There's the other sign. World Mesh sign 1. So we want to call that World Mesh sign 2. Double click. World Mesh fence. World Mesh leaves. I have to do a little bit of tidying up and sorting out. So that's sign 3. World Mesh. So we've got the collision, the entities, the content, the lights, our link blocks, the player, the portal, which is up here, the screen. Let's just rename this. Teleport, so that's the trigger, and then there's the destination, and then the world meshes. So select none. Let's just save over. And then we can export. All we do for that is click the Export GLTF button. Once we've double checked our name, and file location that it'll be exported to. Accept, and then we just export. So it'll do its thing and confirm with this little pop-up. So now all we need to do is check this in the WorldRunner. So when the WorldRunner opens, it'll automatically ask us for the GLTF file that we want to load in. So there's the Minecraft. Open. And there is our world. But as we can see, it's overpowered. So we need to go back and adjust the lighting. So back in Blender, it's the lights that we want to adjust. So select Object Data Properties for the lights, and we want to adjust the strength, the value. So that's our shadow, so 5. So let's go down to 0.05. 0.025. Save. Actually, let's save as. So we've got a restore point. Export again. So select none. Confirmed. And then we'll check this in the previewer. So in the previewer, all we need to do with this is File, Reload Scene, because we've saved over the original. So we just reload, and it'll reload it. Lighting's still a little bright, but it's getting there. So adjust the lighting again in Blender. Take a look at the materials. Because we want to get rid of the specular highlight on the leaves. So we need to check the material because we don't need that. So select leaves, shading workspace, uncouple specular, disable and turn roughness up. It should be the same for all the other materials. So double check. And the grass. That's okay. Save. Select none, save. We'll just save over because nothing has been changed as such. Then export again. Reload. There we go. That's a bit better. So we can jump although it's a bit balloony. There's our link block. So if we click that, that'll link us to a web page or another destination. There's our screen. Jump. Whoops, went a bit too far. And we'll respawn. So we need to change the respawn height. So if we dive off, the respawn height is too high or too low. But everything else seems to work okay. So let's just use the controls. So there's the portal that would take us to another world. There's the other link block, and there are our content entity screens. And there's the trigger block. So we'll click on that and it teleports us back. So all we need to do is a little tweaking here and there, but that is our scene exported with entities into Nowhere.